Aleksandr Dugin unites with Islam against Western hegemony. Hey nerds, so I'm going to continue talking about the Great Reset, which is, of course, by the famous or infamous Russian fascist philosopher. I'd say he's a Russian fascist, imperialist, Christian nationalist who crusades as like a post structuralist and anti capitalist, or I would say postmodernist conservative, but he really uses that as a Trojan horse to smug his apparent anti-capitalism and post-structuralism as a way to smuggle in his fascism. And he's doing a similar type of thing with Islam here, but I'll get into that. And of course, the Great Reset. His book is the Great Awakening versus the Great Reset. And of course, a lot of conspiratorial, internet-brained people have heard about the Great Reset, which is this fucking unhinged grand global conspiracy theory that the billionaires and world leaders at the World Economic Forum in Germany, like Klaus Schwab and King Harry, uh, are all conspiring together to engineer a great reset in which they own everything in the world. No one owns anything. There's a global Chinese style social credit system, and they're going to engineer all this by forcing people to get vaccinated and become trans. This is literally the conspiracy theory laid out that it underlies it's laid out by Aleksandr Dugin, and it's wholeheartedly believed in by and more intellectually understood by James Lindsay, who I've criticized innumerable times before. And Jordan Peterson understands like 10% of it, but this is the underlying foundation behind his wacko Great Reset, evil postmodern neo-Marxists, all that fucking bullshit about Marxism and postmodernism that he talks about. This is the undergirding theory for all of that paranoid pseudo philosophical pseudo intellectual bullshit. So anyway, let's get into Dugin's theory here. Islam against globalization. Another argument of the Great Awakening lies with the peoples of Islamic civilization. So I should explain the Great Awakening is what, like, basically it's the army that he's trying to cultivate to go against the Great Reset, or this like mission to defeat the Great Reset. And he pretends that it's like all the people on earth against the Western liberal empire, but it's, again, like I said, it's really that he just wants to replace the Western Empire for a Russian imperialist Christian nationalist empire, and he pretends to be with people like Tucker Carlson and Jordan Peterson against against like all the lefties, because he is against all the American lefties, but he's against it because he wants to replace the American empire with a European, or specifically a Russian empire. He doesn't just want to stop the Great Awakening is his way to reshape the world in an alternative authoritarian way. He wants one empire, a Russian empire instead of an American empire. But anyway, so another argument of the Great Awakening lies with the peoples of Islamic civilization, that liberal globalism and Western hegemony are radically rejected. I'll stop talking that way. Are radically rejected by Islamic culture, and the very Islamic religion on which that culture is based is obvious. Of course, he could have just said Islam. So liberal globalism and Western hegemony are radically rejected by Islam and Islamic culture. And that's, you're obviously painting Islam in broad brush strokes here. But and I've been going through the Quran, doing a series on it, as some of you know. And you know, I think that like the Quran isn't actually that different from the Bible, but I prefer the Bible because it has more poetry and more of a narrative, and it's more of an anthology. And the Quran is all prescriptive, but they're not that different in terms of brutality and the message and the brutal God and all that kind of shit. But yeah, there are some things that seem like they focus on the brutality even more than the Bible does, perhaps, although there's tons of equally brutal, disturbing shit in the Bible. But So the point is that he's trying to speak for all of Islam, and this could probably describe a lot of Islam, but I don't think it's accurate to say that Islamic culture and religion reject the Western liberal empire and globalism, especially since a lot of Muslim people have immigrated to the Western world, and there have been generations of Muslim people living in the Western world. They sure as fuck don't reject liberal globalism, Western hegemony, since they chose to move there and be ruled by, according to to Dugin anyway, be ruled by Western hegemony and liberal globalism. So anyway, he says that Islam and Islamic culture reject Western liberalism, uh, and Western hegemony and liberal globalism rather. Uh, of course, during the colonial period and under the power and economic influence of the West, some Islamic states found themselves in the orbit of capitalism, but in virtually all Islamic countries, there is a sustained and profound rejection of liberalism, and especially of modern globalist liberalism, I should say. Uh, I would I would say again that's an exaggeration at the very least. I wouldn't say, well, if you're talking about during the colonial period, yeah, and like I was trying to figure out what he meant at first in terms of mentioning capitalism, but he's just talking about it in terms of the historical context. I think that some Islamic states adopted Western capitalism to an extent, but a lot of Islamic countries have not done that. Although, like a lot more modern countries did that, like even Pakistan before it became an Islamist state controlled by terrorists. And so I would say that, uh, but they're like rejecting capitalism isn't necessarily an Islam thing. I don't think I don't think Islam like rejects capitalism any more than Christianity. So that doesn't actually really make sense. But and he's saying it like you could say that Western hegemony is perhaps more against Islam than uh more against Islam than capitalism, or I don't know. I think yeah, like maybe like Western empires against this idea of like an Islamic theocratic empire, but this is like radical Islam that probably most Muslims don't subscribe to, especially if we're talking about Muslims in the actual Western world. Maybe Muslims who are not in the Western world, but and maybe this is the majority of Muslims, but again, the point is that this clearly doesn't represent all Muslims, and he's painting all of Islam with a brush, or broad brush, as if all Muslims in the entire world should be against the Western hegemony according to their own religion. So he's like claiming to understand Islam more than Muslims. But and you could argue that to an extent, but it's obviously a massive exaggeration. He's just being phenomenally hyperbolic as he often is. So he continues. This manifests itself both in extreme forms, Islamic fundamentalism, and in moderate ones. So he's blaming Islamic fundamentalism for rejecting Western hegemony. I mean, the only way that part of the argument makes the most sense to me, because the only way you could say that is that all of the wars like Afghanistan and Iraq, etc., have uh, have drummed up support for terrorist groups, Al Qaeda, ISIS, etc. And if if the Western Empire is killing your family members and the people around there who are offering you revenge are terrorists, it makes sense that they would become terrorists. So it makes sense that Islamic fundamentalists in particular would be against the Western liberal empire, because they in like they have justifiable problems with the Western empire because they've waged war in their countries, which doesn't mean that all Muslims should be against it, but it makes more sense that fundamentalist Muslims would be against that. So it's perhaps more accurate to say that fundamentalist Muslims are against the Western hegemony. But of course, you can't speak for all fundamentalist Muslims either. And a lot of Islamic fundamentalist groups have worked with the Western Empire for many decades. Anyway, so Dugin continues. In some cases, individual religious or political movements become carriers of the anti liberal initiative, while in other cases the state itself takes on the mission. You could say you could say like a theocratic Muslim state perhaps follows into that way, and that's sort of a religious and a political movement, but they're separate aspects. And the idea of a Muslim theocracy is not to be against Western hegemony. It, like, if I understand correctly, to spread Muslim theocracy around the world. Yeah, you reject the Western liberal empire and you want a Muslim empire, but you reject all empires. And again, Dugin just wants to replace the Russian, or I mean, he wants to replace the Western Empire with a European Russian Empire, with the European Empire led by Russia. So, anyway, Dugin continues. In any case, Islamic societies are ideologically prepared for systemic and active opposition to liberal globalization. Maybe some of them are, but again, that's massively hyperbolic. I mean, how prepared are they? Maybe even if they're ideologically, he does says ideologically prepared. Well, some of them are, and I mean that obviously doesn't describe all Islamic societies. They're all ideologically prepared for active opposition to liberal globalization. There are obviously a lot of Islamic societies that work with Western global empires. Like, obviously, the best example right now is Israel, which is a Muslim society, and they're working with the Western Empire, the U.S., to uh, to solve their to solve their perceived problems, which to them are the Palestinians. And obviously, like, Palestinians are Muslim too, and so these people are probably, like, arguably you could say, let's say Palestinians, if you want to, like, generalize entire groups of people as he's doing, would be more likely to be against Western hegemony. But he's saying that theocratic societies, and if I understand correctly, Israel, even more so than Palestine, is more of a theocratic society. The more theocratic Islamic society of the two is working with the Western Empire against an Islamic empire. So because they want to pursue their, like, their ideology related to the whole conflict that's been there for, like, well, since the founding of it in, what was it, 1947 or something like that, but going on since then. And then it's gotten innumerably more complicating details. But anyway, I don't need to get into that. So Dugin continues, the Great Reset's projects do not contain anything, even theoretically, that might appeal to Muslims. Uh, well, I mean, like, to him, the Great Reset doesn't appeal to anyone. So, I mean, to him, the Great Reset doesn't contain anything at all that it should appeal to anyone. He's just trying to recruit the Muslims for his army to take down the Western hegemony and replace it with an Russian European empire. So he continues, that is why the entire Islamic world as a whole represents one huge pole of the Great Awakening. So he wants to recruit all the Muslims across the entire world in his Great Awakening army against the Great Reset to stop the Western liberal hegemony from taking over the world. And I mean, it would seem now, since Orange Fat Captain Orange Fat asshole president over there in America has kind of seems like he's defeated the Great Reset. I mean, according to even Dugin's own logic, I know he's a fan. So I don't know. It seems like he doesn't need to recruit the Muslims. But again, I think my main point is that he doesn't actually care about Muslims and think that and want to recruit them for his mission, just as he does with using anti-capitalism and post-structuralism to make him sound like a post-structuralist and anti-capitalist conservative or postmodern conservative, which drums up support for his views. which is actually just his way to use it as a Trojan horse to smuggle in his fascism. He's doing the same thing with Muslims here. He's acting like, "Hey, Muslims, I'm on your side," whereas in reality, he doesn't actually. He doesn't. He kind of has a problem with Islam because they're against the like Russian European culture that he wants as part of his empire. So he's against Islam too, but he just wants to recruit the Muslims into his great awakening to help him take down the liberal Western hegemony until the Russian European Empire controls the world, and then they can turn on all of the people who help them, who they don't like the Muslims. So if Dugin achieves the world he wants to achieve, then the Great Awakening will defeat the Great Reset, and then the Great Awakening will basically commit mass genocide on all Muslims and everyone else who oppose them, is even including the people who helped them to achieve the Great Awakening and defeat the Great Reset.